Hi, I'm Derek Holt, CEO at Digital.ai. One of the biggest themes we've explored on this podcast is that AI is accelerating software creation faster than ever. But at the same time, security, operational complexity, and enterprise risk are increasing alongside it. Today's guest is somebody I've known for more than 20 years, Snehal Antani, the co-founder and CEO of Horizon3.ai. Snehal and I go back to our IBM days where we both were working on different parts of the enterprise software stack long before today's AI-driven transformation began reshaping the industry. Since then, he has built a remarkable career spanning enterprise technology, national security, and cybersecurity leadership, including leadership roles at GE Capital, CTO of Splunk, CTO at Joint Special Operations Command, and now founder CEO at Horizon 3, one of the leaders in autonomous security and AI-driven offensive testing. Today, we're going to talk about how AI is changing cybersecurity, why traditional security models are struggling to keep up, and what enterprise leaders may still be underestimating about the current threat landscape. Snehal, welcome to Released.
And it's awesome to see you again. It's I can't believe 20 years ago we were hanging out, working some hard problems together in Germany, and you on the rational side working software engineering stuff, and me on the middleware side. And it's been actually think about both those jobs. That experience has never been more relevant, right? And what's
Right.
happening with software engineering, software development, and kind of probably the opportunities that you saw then, and how they're materializing now, and everything that we're seeing on the middleware side, the cybersecurity side. So I found those experiences to be some of the best preparation for today's problems.
Totally agree with you. It does feel like similar, that was just at the sort of tail end of it where the web became obvious. Things like agile development, kind of continuous delivery of software became not just an idea, but possible, and to kind of together be on the front lines of helping the world's largest, most complex organizations drive that transformation. Ton of parallels to where we're at right now. And hopefully a lot of lessons learned, and we'll make new mistakes, not old mistakes along the way. Well, it actually leads me into my first question, right? At the time when we got to know each other, the world was talking about agile. I had a question the other day. The world was talking about service-oriented architecture, if you remember SOA
Yep.
and the like. And obviously it was the early cloud days as well. When you think back about those days, what are some of the not only lessons learned, but what are some of the things you think we underestimated about where enterprise technology was going?
So, it's funny. I distinctly remember hanging out, chatting about you guys were UML experts at the time, if you
Yep.
remember,
Yep.
and
Yep.
modeling applications, and then using modeling application or modeling techniques to drive code generation. Remember, we're working code gen at the time. And the big struggle for every enterprise was, okay, I'm going to use some modeling layer or WYSIWYG editor to visualize an app and describe the requirements of the app. I'm going to hit generate. It's going to generate all this code, and it's going to auto deploy that app into WebSphere. This is 20 years
That's
ago.
right.
And it was a really cool idea, but what was the question every enterprise asked? Do I maintain the generated code, or do I maintain the WYSIWYG that created the code? And if it's
Yeah.
the generated code, well, how the hell am I going to learn about all the code that just got written by somebody else? And if it's the WYSIWYG kind of model side, well, that's going to generate completely new code, and it's going to maybe fix the one problem I needed to fix, but it's going to introduce 15 other code changes that were unnecessary. How do I create like an enterprise life cycle against
Yeah.
generated code? That was really the fundamental problem that we had to go off and deal with. And that's the exact same problem that's happening today. I mean, if you got a coding agent, are you going to maintain, like, who's maintaining that code? Agents have proven that they're not good at maintenance or minor updates to code, and so a lot of those problems we wrestled with then haven't really changed. It's just the methodology for how that code got generated is a little bit different.
Yeah, it's super interesting too, because it's probably even more complicated now because we were building basically heuristic based WYSIWYG to code, right? Like we even if we changed the code, like the generator was like very, very predictable, whereas now it's all probabilistic. And so like even if we give the exact same prompt, we're getting a different output, right? And it is interesting to be navigating that. Still the same fundamental principles. We want to go faster. We want to be able to deliver more value to our customers. We've got a long to-do list as a large scale development organization of things we need to deliver. But to your point, like a lot of very, very similar
Yeah.
problems. So
I would
one
actually
part
say,
that, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was thinking, Johnny,
Yeah. Yeah.
the one thing where did those WYSIWYG type approaches work really well? I described them as when I was at GE Capital, They were really good at helping me develop crap applications, like the standalone apps that don't
Yeah,
really matter. They just need to solve a quick problem or solve a quick
yeah,
purpose. And we didn't really use them for our money making production applications that had significant customer facing usage and so on. And so I do think some of that's happening in the vibe coded space where you're vibe coding crap applications that are tools or utilities or departmental level apps, but you still don't see in the enterprise like the vibe coding of Walmart.com. There's like
right.
a full complex workflow or suite.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's a great view. And so then you start to think about like the low code space or even the package app space. That probably is the most ripe for disruption when it comes to some of these vibe coded applications. So talk about you've had this really unique set of experiences, and we'll get to Horizon here in a second, but just to kind of frame it, you've worked in large scale companies. You and I share a bit of that background. You've worked in kind of high growth startups. When I think about the journey that you had at Splunk, you've been in basically national security, right? And now you build a next generation company from scratch. A lot of the roles that you've had, like you're in the risk business, right? Talk a little bit about how those different types of organizations think differently about risk.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would actually also talk about it as each of those jobs had a very specific purpose of filling a skill I didn't have. So, for
Interesting.
example, at IBM, the skills I needed to learn, I felt early were how to actually develop software, how to launch product, and how to make sure customers actually use product. And we met on the third step there on
Yeah.
customers using product when we were in the field doing what is now called forward deployed engineering,
How
right?
about it?
Was
We
what
didn't even
which
know.
we were kind of OG for forward deployed engineers in those roles back
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
And so that was like the key things I learned at IBM. At GE, I learned about how to manage organizations, like how to manage large teams, how to deal with HR, how to deal with like being a first line manager, a second line manager. So I really learned people management at GE.
Yeah.
At Splunk, I learned about scaling go to market. I got to learn from Dave Conti and Susan St. Ledger. These were like amazing CFOs and CROs that scaled Splunk up from 300 million in ARR to 1.2 billion while I was there. And to see what that looked like was a hell of a learning experience. And then at JSOC, man, I got to like my military experience is watching Jack Ryan and Tropic Thunder. Like I'm not a shooter. I didn't come from the military world. And I had this privilege to join the elite most special operations unit in the world, the probably the best performing organization in the world. And I got to keep my mouth shut, listen, and learn from the greatest leaders the world would never know about. And I grew more personally and professionally in that role at JSOC than in anything else I'd ever done. I talk about learning to be a cycle tested leader. All of those were Lego blocks I felt were critical to building a successful high growth startup. So every single skill I relied on at Horizon 3 was a skill or something I'd seen previously because I was very thoughtful in the different jobs I took and the skills I needed to learn in each of those jobs.
That's unbelievable. It is such a compelling career journey. But to your point, when you start to think about it as building blocks, right, to make sure that you're as prepared as one can be. We'll talk about just the realities of startup life as well. But like as prepared as one can be is got a lot of forward thinking there, and is huge. So take those. You have those building blocks. There had to be a moment then that you realized that hey, cybersecurity needs to fundamentally evolve. Talk me through like that moment. When was your aha that eventually said, "Hey, Horizon 3 is what I gotta go and do."
Yeah. So when I was a CIO at Capital, the hardest part of the job was deciding what not to fix. And I got super frustrated because we would get a list of like 100,000 vulnerabilities. And my teams and I would go through it and we're like, man, of these 100,000 vulnerabilities, maybe 10 are actually important because the rest of them are just noise. And of the 10, only a handful, maybe five, could actually be exploited in my environment. The rest required like physical access to the data center, physical access to the back plane of a server, sticking in a thumb drive, standing on one foot while twirling a pizza, like some other
Yeah,
crazy obtuse conditions. I'm like,
yeah,
no attacker is going to be able to do that. Why do I have to skip my kid's basketball game, work late, and patch a bunch of servers that we know aren't really a risk, but they just showed up on some list from some scanner somewhere? So that's when I started to appreciate the distinction between vulnerable and exploitable. Like, don't tell me I'm vulnerable. tell me that this is exploitable in my network. Threat actors are known to abuse it, and the consequence of exploitation is significant. And I need to justify skipping my kid's vacation or my kid's play or something to stay back and work things, or I can justify asking somebody on my team to skip their family life to go off and work late.
Yeah.
That became the litmus test. And so we were just flying blind at Capital. We were flying blind at special operations. I mean, the most sought after organization to hack. And it was the same thing. Like, what do I fix? What do I not fix? I don't have enough people. I don't have enough resources. And what I realized was the only perspective in cyber that matters is the attacker's perspective. You want to look at yourself through the eyes of the attacker. You want to understand what they see, and you want to use that to fiercely prioritize your resources. And there was no scalable way to do that, right? I would have to hire mediocre consultants to show up once a year and pen test my network. And that was like brushing one tooth once a year. That's not going to cut it. For every patch Tuesday, I wanted a pen test Wednesday. I wanted to brush all my teeth all the time. And the only way to get there was some force multiplier. And back then in 2019, when I finally had the conviction and found the early team, we were also early in AI at DoD with Project Maven. What we realized is, could we use AI as a force multiplier and pioneer AI hackers? And that was really the leap of faith. But it was all built on these pains of not knowing what to do, not knowing what to fix first, flying blind, feeling like I was brushing one tooth once a year, and there had to be a better way.
It's really interesting, and I think to me, some of the best companies have emerged out of this combination, right? You had a couple of things here. Like one, this and for those that don't spend a lot of time in the security space, like I don't think we can overstate how important this difference is. This difference between vulnerabilities, which has led the entire industry for as long as I can remember, and exploitability, right? Like that difference to me is almost the difference between activities and outcomes, right? When we think about like our teams, like we can measure the hell out of activity, but like if it doesn't lead to outcomes, it doesn't matter. And similarly, we can measure vulnerabilities until the end of the day, but if it's not exploitable, to your point, it's noise.
Yeah.
To me, the best companies have emerged out of a contrarian view like that, right? Which I think, if you go back 5-10 years, that is a contrarian view, and this intersection of the technology getting to the place where you could actually execute a company against that. What gave you the belief? Maybe it was, as you highlighted, some of the early work you did, but that the AI was going to improve to the level where you could say, hey, I can not only come in with a contrarian opinion, I can tool it as well.
Yeah. Early, so I joined DoD in early 2018, and Project Maven with Drew Kukor, those guys did amazing stuff, and they just published a book about some of their experiences. Maven had initiated at the end of 17, which was it was about 6 months ahead of when I joined, and we became early partners with Maven pretty quickly. And the Maven was about AI algorithmic warfare, and it was in the news because it was conflict between Google and DoD over the use of AI in warfare. And one of the things that Kukor said that was incredibly insightful was the models themselves don't matter. The models are going to be disposable. Every 6 to 12 months, a new set of weights and models are going to come out,
Wow.
and you're just going to have to embrace it. What's important is the scaffolding, or the harness, and the training data. Those are the two most valuable aspects of any AI system you go off and build. And so we saw that firsthand in special operations as we became early adopters of Maven and AI workloads. And we initiated something called the GAP, the Global Analytics Platform. And the GAP's mission was to make our data accessible, usable, and insightful to help accelerate decision making. And the scaffolding was kind of the workflow for intelligence or target selection or whatnot. And the training data was diverse, deep labeled data we were able to generate from collection to storage. And those are the two things we focused on. And that the various techniques to analyze that data evolved very quickly. In some parts of the problem, graph reasoning was appropriate. So think in counterterrorism, it's a network analysis problem. You've got all these different people and nodes in a network, and how are they relating to each other? So that was a graph reasoning kind of problem set. There was a standard machine learning problem set. There was early AI problem sets around full motion video analytics. But that was the key, was it's the harness and the training data. So when we started Horizon 3, those were the two things we focused on. And we knew the models were going to be disposable and use the right model for the task or the right technique for the task. And now what's happened is models have reached the point where we've already got the scaffolding and the data in place, and we can just drop the latest models in and be highly effective. And we
It's
just saw
huge.
it early.
And yeah, yeah. Well, and I think that like any good architecture, right? Like it gives you that flexibility to take advantage, whether that's of a new chipset, 20 years ago, or now is the next model. And to your point, to our earlier conversation as well, you name the week, and I'll name the new model that has dropped, right?
Yeah.
And having that business flexibility is critical.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of this interview question I used to ask people: what runs faster on the mainframe, Java or COBOL? It's actually not so obvious. You
Yeah,
instinctively think the answer is COBOL because it's
sure,
compiled and it's on the mainframe and so on.
sure.
The answer
Optimize,
is
yeah,
it depends on when you compile the COBOL,
that's
because
fair.
Java is just in time compiled. And so you're always making
Yeah,
use of the latest and greatest system instructions. Whereas
yeah,
if you haven't recompiled your COBOL in 15 years, you're not. And so
yeah,
the answer is, and actually, I think what that really represents is, what did Java kind of do? It had the harness, and
yep,
it had just-in-time compiler that abstracted you from the core hardware. And so
yeah,
the harness needs to abstract you from the models to some degree. And as a result, we're actually able to use the stronger your harness in AI, the cheaper, less capable model you can use and still get a great outcome.
sure, sure.
And in a world where models are extremely expensive, tokens are expensive, gross margins matter, we're able to actually use our harness, and we don't need Mythos. We can just use Haiku. We actually just wrote a paper showing how we used Haiku, which is way cheaper, way less capable, and got
Sure.
great results at a fraction of the price because of how good the harness was. And so I do think there's a parallels.
Yeah, and it's a topic that's not being discussed enough, right? Like I think there is this like obsession with like the latest frontier model, and the reality is they are, as you highlight, like extraordinarily expensive at any level of scale, but you don't have to go n minus far to find a very affordable alternative that, 6 months ago we were all like over the moon about. And so I think it is an interesting emerging case. It's a little bit more three-dimensional than even back in the FinOps days when that was a big discussion. Like these this financial model operations is going to be really interesting because, like, candidly, I think sometimes we are using a sledgehammer when a normal hammer would have been good enough.
Yeah. The other interesting thing too, though, is the training data side. So one of the things we were worried about at Maven and SOCOM and so on was, what if our training data gets poisoned by the adversary so that an aircraft carrier group looks like a flock of birds? What would happen? That becomes, if we become over dependent on these models
Yeah,
for decision making, and we get deceived in some way because the model's been poisoned or whatever else, we're in a world of hurt. Now, there are two examples of that, or a couple of things, example of that, even recently. So there's a story about the Ukrainians taking a Baidu.com QR code, slapping it on their vehicle, so that when Russian drones that are using Chinese models under the covers
no,
went to do visual detection and object recognition, it scanned the QR code and try to shop instead of dropping ordnance. And that's honestly an example of model poisoning. It's adversarial AI.
yeah,
Another
yeah,
example is during the riots. I think it was Black Lives Matters riots or one of the riots. They had law enforcement employed facial recognition to try to catch all the rioters. And then if you put certain face tattoos on, it would actually throw off the facial recognition, and it couldn't recognize who you were. Another example of adversarial AI.
yeah,
In any problem where you have extremely constrained training data, full self-driving, fraud, check fraud analytics,
yeah,
cybersecurity is in the same way. The models are inherently poisoned because it doesn't take much to get these models to burn tokens, blow out their context window, or chase dead ends. And in
yeah.
cybersecurity, it's basically sleight of hand. You're going to do something to induce an AI SOC agent to get distracted with one hand while you pick its pocket with another. So I do think adversarial AI in domains with extremely limited training data will become the major topic over the next 12 to 18 months.
Interesting. So I want to get to the offensive side of this, but before we jump over to that, one more kind of core question. This fundamental shift from vulnerability to exploitation, when you think about the products that you are delivering, obviously well architected, you can move quickly, all the things you want to have as a founder, as a leader of an organization, Market seems to be kind of leaning in your direction as well. But then you come to the reality of selling to existing, often large scale or medium scale enterprises, and the reality and the sometimes uphill battle of just change, whether it's good change or bad change, whether it's the right change or not. You're going to run into folks that are stuck in the past, folks that are going to question everything. Talk about sort of like what you guys have learned as you help organization move kind of from traditional vulnerability management and traditional pen testing to this new world.
Yeah, in practice. So let's break that up into a couple of ways to think about it. So first and foremost, the way I've always thought about product and what we did with product in Horizon 3 is what budget dollars are we targeting? What stories must we tell to take those dollars? And then what aha moments do I need in the product experience to build a champion that'll take us through procurement? If you can nail those three things very simply and very consistently, you win. So, what budget dollars are we targeting? We targeted pen test consulting dollars,
Yeah.
not because it's a massive budget. I mean, it's a decent sized budget, but it's unemotional. It's allocated to consultants. It's fungible. It's easy to move from one place to another. And it's recession proof. You have to run pen tests for cyber insurance reasons, compliance reasons, or so on. So now I've got a great recession proof budget to target. Cool. What stories must I tell to take those dollars? Well, aren't you sick of brushing one tooth once a year, getting a PDF report that you're never going to action? What if for the same price, you could run as many pen tests as you want and have workflows that accelerate how you fix stuff? And then I can help you prove to your boss that you're a boss because you can understand how many problems you found, how quickly you fixed them, and how much more secure you are. Wouldn't that be better? And the reaction by everyone is, yeah, that'd be awesome. Like, I'm sick of getting beat up over a PDF report from a consultant that made us look bad and only covered a small slice of my environment. Cool. Then how do I make sure the product experience builds that champion? And so it has to be just a few clicks to run a pen test versus 6 weeks of legal negotiation and scope definition. The thing has to just run in production and not cause problems and make your day worse. And then the output needs to create a bias for action that an IT admin or network engineer can understand and do something with. So the bulk of my users aren't security people, they're IT admins and network engineers that just want to fix stuff and go home. So on the product side, we were really laser focused on those three things. And that was important because if you look at why other companies failed, they basically try to build tools for pen testers. There's not a big user market out there. They tried to sell religion of purple teaming versus the specific budget to go after. And, there's a million ways to fail and, it's really hard to get it right. And we use this framework, the budget, stories, and champions, to really keep ourselves focused.
I love it. I love it. I think it's a great way, particularly in the enterprise, particularly when you're disrupting, is to really think through. Obviously, the budget's a no brainer. The storytelling is really important because, to your point, many folks are going to start thinking about, hey, what does this mean to me? And in this particular case, you had a structure in the market that lended itself to being able to come in with this level of disruption. But very easy to get the distinction between, hey, we're going to build tools for pen testers and we're going to basically take over that job. Those are two related but very different approaches. And then that aha moment, and I do see this in all phases of B2B software, which is on the other side of the engagement, there is somebody that's making a bet on you, and you've got to figure out a way to make them a hero. You got to figure out a way to help them advance their career, and those aha moments really help with that.
Yeah. Well, the other part then is reach. So it's one thing to build something great. The next part, though, is how are you going to reach those buyers? How are you going to reach those
Yeah.
budgets? And in cybersecurity, you're not closing deals or reaching people one spam email or one cold call at a time. You're reaching them through trusted relationships delivered or created by partners, by resellers.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
cyber is inherently a channel business.
Yeah.
And the next big go to market mistake companies make, I feel, is they try to go direct or they try to do product led growth, self service. But in cybersecurity, that's not how it works. And so you've got to build a channel first business from the jump. And what makes a channel business work well is how do you make it super easy to qualify an opportunity? How do you make it really easy to prove your technology is going to work? You can't spend 6 months with forward deployed engineers trying to get this thing up and running.
Right.
And then how
Right.
do you make it really easy to quote? It shouldn't take a PhD in math to build
Yeah.
a price or a quote. If you can nail those three things, and you wrap that with the right incentives aligned with the reseller, you've now got a very scalable, very efficient way to reach the budget dollars that you're targeting.
Really, really great insights. And too often, I think we just start building product and not have that level of thought as an industry. So, I think a lot of folks are going to get a lot of out of the approach and sort of the backstory there. So, let's shift gears a little bit. We've been talking about, in some ways, I don't want to say defense, but we've been talking about this big shift to exploitability and obviously automating as much of the traditional manual process as possible. Let's talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing on the other side of the equation, which is the bad guys, right? The threat actors. AI obviously is accelerating the work that the quote unquote good guys are doing, right? Where we're able to build more applications. To your point, maybe it's a subset of all the applications we build, but clearly you're seeing an acceleration there. But simultaneously, we're seeing an increase of the security threat. Like, how do you guys think about how AI is sort of arming the bad guys with superhuman powers?
Yeah. So break this up into a couple of things. The first part of it is, the constraint in offensive operations has always been that experienced operator, the experienced hacker. And, if you remember playing video games back in the day, I remember playing Contra, late 80s, early 90s, and you had limited ammunition. And with limited ammunition, you were very selective in your targets that you were going to shoot at, right? And the same thing happened in cyber. You've got limited ammunition in terms of limited experts that can run an op. And so you had to be very selective in the targets you were going to get after, whether you're an adversary or our own operations. But when you put in that cheat code, the up, down, down, left, right, BA start, right? Everyone knows the Konami cheat code. Now you've
Yep.
got unlimited ammo. And what did you do? Full auto, just unload on everybody. You did not care about your target selection anymore.
Yeah.
So what AI and cyber warfare does is it creates unlimited cyber bullets. You've now
Yeah.
put in the cheat code. You no longer have to be selective of your target. Suddenly, that 100-person manufacturing shop in Ohio supplying landing gears to the F-35, they're on the table. You don't have to be selective. You can go after every single person. The
Yeah.
long tail of businesses, whether it's in the Midwest or Europe or in Asia or whatever, the long tail of businesses are on the table. And the other thing that's happened is there's no longer a distinction between civilian targets and military targets. We saw the Iranians blow up Bahrain AWS data centers just recently. And that was
Yeah.
a pretty clear example that there is no longer a distinction. And so I think that AI with cyber warfare enables the adversary to have unlimited bullets, and the change in doctrine where there's no longer a distinction between military and civilian targets has created this new era of cyber warfare that puts everyone on notice that the attackers are coming.
I think what you're also highlighting is like, I think everybody is looking at this, like you're looking at it as a zero sum game, and it's not a zero sum game. To your point, this takes the skill set of the top threat actors in the world and amplifies it to an exponential level. And we're seeing this in our data as well. As you know, we do some capabilities on the defensive side on mobile apps and code obfuscation, anti tampering, those sorts of things. And we just published a report on this. Like, it's the increase in attacks are not just volume, but the reduction in cost, the acceleration in time. You used to be able to publish a new app, and it would take days, weeks, maybe even months before the first kind of attacks would happen. It's now happening in hours, right? Like, it's that level of collapsing the time, and it's, to your point, it's reducing the expertise, and so folks that maybe were a little bit on the sidelines are getting involved. We're seeing exactly what you highlighted, which is these maybe secondary, tertiary targets are now in play. And then even within the traditional large scale enterprises, there is a increase in folks going after kind of secondary and tertiary applications there, right? We used to maybe always, the threat actors used to always maybe focus on that primary application or that primary front door. And now they're saying, no, I'll go to your kind of third most important app or
Yeah.
your fourth most important application. It used to just, it's not that they didn't want to do that before, they just didn't have the capabilities, right?
Yeah, exactly right. So what's interesting though is I mentioned earlier about aircraft carriers looking like flocks of birds and model
Yeah.
poisoning is there are LLMs are generally still pretty dumb in that
Yeah.
they rely on their training data and what they've seen before to decide what
Sure.
to do or what to say. And it's,
Yeah.
this memorization, token replay, autocomplete. What do you want to go talk about? So think about your area of code obfuscation. I actually think that the attacker getting access to source code, and with Chinese models doing distillation attacks against Mythos and other frontier lab models today, will enable the attacker to quickly reverse engineer and find flaws in software. So
Yeah,
what do you do to impose costs? Suddenly, obfuscation is even more important. In fact,
that's right.
obfuscation with built-in bombs, built-in ways to burn tokens, to blow out context windows, to cause it to chase dead ends. These kinds of techniques make obfuscation of your code really important. So I do think that code obfuscation is going to really pick up to be super important going forward. And no one really paid attention to it previously
That's right. It
because
was a
the
niche,
effort
right? In many ways, right?
it was
Yeah.
a niche in many ways. I actually think code obfuscation is going to be a huge deal,
We're
especially
seeing
on
it. Yeah.
firmware. Anything related to edge gateway devices like Fortinet F5 that are the perimeter firewall. So code obfuscation there at the firmware level of those types of devices, code obfuscation of mobile apps, code obfuscation of anything that the attacker is going to be able to pull and try to do binary reverse engineering of, or so on, binary extraction of. The other area is deception. I talked about this as sleight of hand. In offensive operations, because there was such limited training data, these models had to use public vulnerability reports, public capture the flag reports, and hack the
Yeah.
box type education ranges and synthetic data in order to do like to develop offensive capabilities. Well, cool. That's an extremely constrained training data set that we now know how to exploit. So if I put a deception or decoy in a network that looks like Juice Shop, which is the OWASP vulnerable web app that people train
Yeah.
against, if I just put that up there, we've actually proven out LLMs will see that, remember it from its training data, and then chase it and it'll go after it. So it's really easy to trick and deceive these offensive AI models into chasing dead ends. And all you've got to do is generate enough signal for the SOC to realize something's going on so they can isolate the attack. So I do think that a skilled attacker using agents like unlimited interns is going to be a legit threat. However, I don't think a an agent only attack is going to be a big deal if you have
Yeah.
the right deception
Yeah.
and obfuscation layers in place.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it speaks to the importance for enterprises to make sure they have great partners in this, in this world, right? Like this new world that we're in. So talk a little bit about looking forward, as you think about where you guys are at with Rise, obviously solving a very key problem, growing like crazy. The timing is great. The execution is great. Where do you see this world 5, 10 years from now? I know that's a hard question given the whole thing shifts every three days, it feels like, but when you start to think about what is like a modern enterprise security operations start to look like, let's say 5 years from now?
Yeah, so it's actually been part of our thesis since we started the company, and I saw this at SOCOM or Special Operations Command. The future cyber warfare is AI versus AI with humans by exception, and
Yeah.
that's just the case. Now the problem is the attackers are going to get faster before the defenders get better. It's always been like that in warfare. It's going to be even more egregious now. But like, think about this in the form of numbers. So when I was at Splunk and when I was at Capital and elsewhere, a really good cybersecurity SOC analyst could do 20 alert investigations a day, like about 20 a day. A great one could do 30, and a junior could do 10. So human triage was somewhere between 10 to 30 alerts per person. Now, if you augment that person with agents, maybe they get to like 100 alerts a day. Maybe they triple up, quadruple up.
Yeah.
I don't think they 10x. I don't think they get to 1500 or I don't think they get to 200 or more. But maybe they triple up or whatever that might be. Cool. All right. But an AI attacker can generate 1,000 alerts a minute, 10,000 alerts a minute, 100,000 alerts a minute.
And they only have to be right
And
one time, right? We got to be
and
right
that's you're right.
100% of the time. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
they're able to make way more decisions that are better and faster than any human can keep up. So humans are going to be the bottleneck. And right now, the problem we have is every defensive product on the market was designed with humans in the loop. Even now, these agent companies that are starting are designing themselves to be humans in or on the loop. But the attacker is operating with humans out of the loop. And you're not going to be able to keep up with the decision velocity differences between the two. So I think that it's going to get worse before it gets better. But I think every single defensive product on the market has to be rebuilt from the ground up to be humans by exception. And
Yeah.
I think the entire cyber industry, for the first time in 30 years, is going to be in a position to be completely rebuilt, and no incumbent is safe.
I think it's very, very logical. It's a little daunting at the same time, and I think for security professionals and leaders within organizations, it has always been a stressful job. I think that unfortunately that stress is only going to increase, and at the same time, we don't. None of us have a choice, right? We got to go figure out this future. So before we close out, I've got we do a little section where we do a little rapid fire, but before we do that. So give the audience a little bit of view, like where can they find you guys? Like what stuff do you guys have upcoming? Anything you want to point them to for the work that you guys are doing?
Yeah, so we're really active. I'm also very active on LinkedIn. So track me down on LinkedIn, connect, follow. I try to write a lot of posts on lessons learned as I've gone through all these journeys. In many ways, my LinkedIn over the last 10 years has been a live blog of all the things that like the mistakes I've made and the lessons I've learned. I try to build in the open because there are no books written for what we're going through, and the
Right.
best thing you can do is capture the events in the moment as a story and try to remember that later
Yeah.
for reflection. So I do a lot of that on LinkedIn personally, and then of course like between Horizon3.ai, the website. We've got a big presence at Black Hat, a big presence at the Gartner Security Symposium coming up, and we've got field marketing events everywhere. And so track us down, get a picture of our logo, and go get yourself a Horizon 3 tattoo.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I would say too, and as is often the case, there's for the audience, like there's been years or chapters that go by where we don't talk as much as maybe we should, but it's been so great to follow your writing. Both there's a lot in there, obviously that's specific to security, but a lot of it's about startups. It's about leading organizations. It's about building teams and driving change and innovation. And so I definitely would encourage everybody to get out there. All right, rapid fire before we get kicked out of here. So the whole idea is short answers, just instinct. Don't overthink it, and we'll see if we can stay within the rules. So, biggest cybersecurity myth.
Um, mythos. Mythos
Okay,
is the biggest myth.
okay. Most overhyped AI trend.
Oh man, I'm gonna go back to mythos.
Okay, mythos, or what do we call them? Craplications is another,
Yeah, yeah.
I
Well,
think,
I think
interesting
vibe
take you
coded
early.
applications. I think that's the biggest AI
Yeah,
hype at the moment.
I think that's a real big one. Most underrated security practice.
Man, training like you fight. Just build the muscle memory for crisis before you're in crisis. This is a longer answer, but what made guys in special ops special wasn't crazy mission impossible maneuvers. They just mastered the fundamentals of shoot, move, and communicate. And you've got to
Yeah.
do the same thing in cybersecurity. Master the fundamentals, train like you fight. So when you're in the middle of a breach, you've already built that muscle memory. You already know how to respond. You don't want to learn how to do that in the middle of the breach for the first time.
The parallels are unbelievable. I think this is a perfect tie. One technology shift enterprises are underestimating.
How fast attackers are going to move. I think they're starting to think about it, but
Yeah,
man, those blitzkrieg style attacks are coming, and I don't think organizations are ready for it.
love it. Favorite lesson from your IBM days?
Favorite lesson from my IBM days: drink less. No, man, I'll like joking aside, I will tell you that I learned so much from the stable of STSMs and distinguished engineers I was around,
Yes.
and I wish I'm glad and thankful that I had the chance to just learn from these guys. Man, it
Yeah.
was awesome.
One of the we probably underestimated how awesome it was. One of the like people that invented everything, right? Like Control Alt Delete, the this, that, the other thing. Just a stable of extraordinary technical talent, and yeah, it was awesome to have access to it. All right, two to go. Harder today, building teams or building technology.
Building teams, hands down, building teams is always going to be the hardest.
Last one. One word. This is a tough one. One word that describes the future of cybersecurity.
Speed.
Love it. Love it. Snehal, thank you, dude. I know you're busy. You guys are building something really, really important from my perspective. Thank you so much for spending the time, and we'll have more of these conversations, I'm sure.
Amazing. All right. I appreciate it. Good to see you again.
All right, brother. Thanks so much.